Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is nibble. Let's take a moment to look at some of the definitions or the ways that we use this verb. The first couple ways you might hear nibble used are in connection to eating. We can use nibble to describe the action of taking small bites out of something. Or we can use it to describe eating in very small amounts, especially if it's between meals. A third way you might hear nibble used is to mean to gently bite at a part of the body in a nervous way. Right? So sometimes I've read stories and I've seen authors use language kind of like he was nibbling at his bottom lip. Right? So kind of nervously biting at that lower lip. A fourth way our verb nibble gets used is to mean to gradually erode or eat away at something. So gradually again is focused on something being done rather slowly in small amounts over a long period of time. A fifth way you might hear the verb nibble used is to mean to show cautious interest in a project or proposal. When I thought about this fifth definition, my mind went to writers for TV shows and movies. They can spend many years creating these stories, and then they kind of try and sell their ideas to movie studios or production organizations. And if they have one who's kind of like, this is a maybe, let's talk about it some more, right? We could use this verb to describe that cautious interest, right? So it's not an enthusiastic, we are definitely going to make this movie, but it's a little more reserved, like it's a possibility. You should know that nibble is a regular verb. To make the progressive form of this verb, you're going to drop the E and then add ing to form nibbling. The past tense and participle forms of this verb can be made just by adding the letter D since this verb already ends in an E. Our base verb, nibble, ends in an L sound, and this is a voiced sound, nibble, And when we have voiced sounds at the end of words and we add a ed ending, we're going to make a D sound. And we're not going to add an extra syllable as we say it. So our past tense and participle forms of the verb should sound like this. Nibbled, nibbled. Now, I do have a couple phrasal verbs for us to look at. And the first one we're going to discuss today can be used a couple different ways. So you might hear people say nibble away at or just nibble at. Those two are going to have the same three meanings. The first way you hear nibble away at or just nibble at used is to mean to eat something at a very slow pace and with maybe small bites. An example of this might be, are you feeling okay? You're just nibbling away at your dinner. So in this particular sentence, maybe a parent has noticed, right, something looks different. Normally, this child is very enthusiastic about eating, but right now, the child is eating very slowly, taking very small bites, right? It makes them think, something's not quite right. Now, a second way nibble away at gets used, or nibble at, again, is to erode something in very small amounts over time. An example of this might be, sea erosion has been nibbling at the coast, and now several houses are on the verge of collapsing. So here we're talking about the water kind of slowly breaking down. It could be rock, could be some other type of land mass where we have houses, right? So now they're going to collapse or fall because of this erosion. A third way that nibble away at or nibble at gets used means to bite something very slowly so as not to break the surface. Let's look at an example of that. When she nibbles at his toes, it makes the baby laugh. So here in this sentence, we might be describing a mother kind of playfully biting in a very soft way, right? Not in a way that where her tooth is going to go through the skin, but in a light way, again here, that kind of makes the baby giggle or laugh. The last phrasal verb we'll discuss today is to nibble away on, or just nibble on. This has the exact same meaning as our first phrasal verb today, where we talked about eating something very slowly and with small bites. An example of this might be, we've nibbled on trail mix this afternoon. Right? So here someone's not saying, I took a whole handful, all right, and put it in my mouth, right? So maybe one person takes a little, one piece. Maybe it's a peanut or a raisin, right? Does some other work, a little later takes one more piece, right? So we're describing something being eaten very slowly and with small bites or small portions. Now let's move on and practice our verb of the day, nibble, in a couple different verb tenses. Today we're going to practice the past progressive, which is also known as the past continuous, and the simple future. Let's start with the past progressive. We use this verb tense to talk about actions that are in progress during a time period in the past. And the reason I love calling this past progressive instead of past continuous is the two P's are going to help me remember that I need two parts to my verb. So in affirmative or positive sentences, I'm going to start with a subject, and I've got to pay attention to what that subject is because it's going to affect the first part of my verb. If my subject is I, he, she, or it, then the first part of my verb is going to be was, W-A-S, was. And then I'll use that ing form of the verb. But if my subject is you, we, or they, I'm going to use were, W-E-R-E, and then the ing form of the verb. Here's another example. He was nibbling too much between meals. Okay. We could be describing something that was ongoing during a particular day, maybe a particular week, or perhaps even a particular month. But that action was ongoing. That's what the past progressive is telling us. Now let's look at some negative past progressive sentences. Again, I have to pay attention to my subject. If the subject is I, he, she, or it, I'm going to use was not, and then the ing form the verb. You might also hear the contraction wasn't, and then the ing form. But if my subject is you, we, or they, I'm going to use were not or weren't, and then the ing form the verb. An example of this might be, the animals weren't nibbling on the discarded pumpkins. Right? So here we're saying they're not taking small bites. Maybe they weren't taking any bites whatsoever. Finally, let's talk about a yes or no question in the past progressive. To do this, I use a past form of be, so was or were. It depends on what my subject is, and that subject comes next. Then I'm going to use the ing form of the verb. Here's my last past progressive example. Were they nibbling before dinner? So here we're asking if that action was ongoing before a certain period in time. Now let's move on and talk about the simple future. There are three ways to make sentences in English in the simple future, but today we're going to focus on making sentences with be going to. This is really common when people are making plans. You might also hear it a bit with predictions, but most commonly with our plans. And the more confident we get, right? We'll definitely see examples here of be going to to talk about those future plans. So because be is part of my verb here, I'm going to have to pay attention to my subject. So if my subject is I, then I'm going to use am, going, to, and then the base verb. And when I say base verb, I mean no special endings, no S, no ED, no ING, none of that. Okay. Now, if my subject is you, we, or they, I'm going to use are, A-R-E, going, to, and the base verb. And finally, if my subject is he, she, or it, I'll use is, going, to, and the base verb. Let's look at another affirmative example here. We're going to nibble on snacks while watching the game. In this sentence, someone's sharing their plans. Now, let's talk about making negative simple future sentences. To do this, again, I start with my subject and I pay attention to what it is. I've got to match my form of be to that subject. After be, after my form of be, I'm going to use not, then going, to, and the base verb. Now, you might hear contractions with is not. We can turn that into isn't or are not. That can become aren't. There isn't a contraction for am not, though. So don't combine that into a single word. An example of a negative simple future sentence might be, she isn't going to nibble her nails, right? So that's back to that kind of nervously biting on a part of one's body. Right? Here, she doesn't have that plan. Okay? Finally, let's look at making a yes or no question in the simple future. To do this, I start with my form of be, so am, is, are. But I want to match that form to my subject, which comes next. And then we're going to use going, to, and our base verb. Here's my last example. Is anyone going to nibble at your script? Right? So here, I might be asking someone, right? Anyone showing some of that cautious interest in a particular subject. Now, let's move on and talk a little bit about just one related word today. And that related word is going to be the noun form of our verb. So nibble as a noun has the exact same spelling and the exact same pronunciation. It can have a couple different meanings. One might be the instance of nibbling something, or we could even be referring to small pieces of food. An example of this might be, they had a few nibbles between meals. Okay? So, might think of this a bit like snacks. Okay? But again, the focus usually is that it's a very small amount, or small pieces, as our definition says here. A second way the noun nibble gets used is to refer to an expression of kind of that tentative or cautious interest in some project or proposal. An example of this might be, the team received a few nibbles of interest on their starting catcher before the trade deadline. Okay? So here, little different than that Hollywood script we talked about earlier today, but here there are professional teams showing a little bit of cautious interest. It's not a done deal, but they're thinking, maybe we could trade one of our players for your starting catcher. And this is clearly a reference to the sport of baseball. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.